Good evening, everyone. I call to order the meeting of the Open Source Voting System Technical Advisory Committee of Chair Chris Giordano. Secretary Chan, can you take the roll?
Yes. Chair Chris Giordano.
Here.
Vice Chair Larry Bufundo is not here. Member Carl Haig.
Here.
Member Ron Catal.
Here.
Member Tony Wasserman.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, and we also have with us today Secretary Don Chan. Next item.
Item 2, general public comment. Public comment on any issue within the committee's general jurisdiction that is not covered by another item on this agenda.
Okay, if anyone would like to speak, you have a few minutes. Okay, seeing none. Next item.
Item 3, approval of minutes of the previous meeting. Discussion and possible action to approve minutes for the February 8th, 2018 committee meeting.
Okay, thank you again, Secretary Chan, for doing a good job. I was not at the meeting, but I did listen to the meeting audio online, and I reviewed these minutes. Made some minor corrections.
Changes to the minutes?
If anyone has any changes, what I'm saying is I made some corrections before the draft was published.
Okay, because here, just under number 2, it says there was no public, and maybe it should, that means there were no, we didn't have any. representatives of
Jim
the public.
Soper came, but he came later. He wasn't present for.
Okay, so there was no public as opposed to no public comment.
Yeah, there were no members of the public present at that
Right,
time.
got it.
How are people
Okay.
doing on the?
Looks good to me.
So I think I'll have to go through these items on the edits and make sure that the edits I made match what's in the minutes.
Well, let's.
I mean, I
let's
took
just-
notes.
Let's do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Is there any discussion before we take public comment? Okay, let's take public comment on this item. Seeing none? Secretary Chan?
Chair Giordano.
Yes.
Vice Chair Larry Bufundo is not here. Member Haig.
Yes.
Member Catal.
Yes.
Member Wasserman.
Yes.
You have a vote of 4, so it passes.
Okay, next item.
Item number 4, administration. Discussion and possible action regarding administrative issues, including but not limited to attendance at election commission meetings by committee members, committee's website, and the committee's written reports to the commission.
Okay, for this item, I'll just start off with a couple things. I did have a chance to listen to the meeting on the audio, and I thought everyone did a great job in my absence, and thank you, Tony, for leading the meeting. You did a great job. I'm just going to make a couple quick comments on things that I heard during the meeting. First, our next report is due in early May, not April, and that's because we have to do 3 reports per year, so it's every 4 months.
Right.
And also, during the meeting, I think someone had said that the TAC member that was presenting before the commission should say something about the RFP, and nothing was mentioned about the RFP, so maybe at the next report it might be worth someone saying something kind of positive about that. So,
You talking about the RFP for the temporary?
yeah, for the interim system. Yeah, I think the sentiment seemed to be that people were, pleased with a lot of the things that were mentioned. I was pleased, so I think it would be worth saying something to that effect. But so the things that we usually have to decide are just confirm our next meeting time, and then confirm who will be speaking at the next commission meeting. So, Don,
The next commission meeting is March, is the 21st,
21st?
and it will be in room 305, not 408, because they're doing renovations to that room.
And so, did we decide who's going to be there?
I have it written down that Tony said he was available for that.
Let me double check.
Mhm.
I am too.
Yes,
so-
yes, I have it on my calendar already. Yes, so
Okay, good.
I would be happy to take input from my colleagues here as to the things that we should push. I don't think I've seen the complete new RFP. Is it on the
Not here.
website?
I think
For
it
the
was-
interim system?
Yeah.
It was part of the
We
agenda
gave
packet.
it out last week, or last month, I mean.
Yeah,
Okay.
it should be part of the agenda packet for last month's meeting.
So
I
it'll
also
be on
have
the,
it here.
it'll be on the web.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, this was the one that, at the last meeting I discussed how, for example, the price was weighted the same as whether the hash. was
Right, I
right.
remember
So
that.
Yeah.
Yes, got it. Yes, the waiting, we liked the waiting, I remember that.
Yeah. Okay, so then, great, thank you, Tony. And so our next meeting is still going to be the second Thursday of April in this room?
Yes, not in this room. Oh, you're talking about this committee. In April, it will be on the 12th in this room.
Okay.
We're-
Okay. April 12th.
So, and I guess for the next meeting, we should have a draft prepared of our quarterly
Yeah.
annual report. Would someone like to volunteer to prepare a draft of that? In the past, it's been maybe just a page and a half long. I can forward a template to anyone that would like to prepare that.
I might be able to do that. I am also behind on my other backlog of stuff for this committee, though.
Okay, well, so this is kind of a mandatory thing. So-
Yes. Yeah. No. It's. I think Lair did it last time, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm happy for it to be my turn then.
Okay, great.
And then,
So I'll send you the template.
sounds great. And then next time in 4 months or whatever, I can try and push it out to somebody else.
Okay. Good. Let's see, is there anything else we need to discuss at this item? Oh, and also, so there was a patch that you had submitted, Carl, that was more a technical thing, and I attached it to this agenda item, but we could skip that.
No, that was just my mouse click hit the wrong
Okay.
file. It got the one above it, so when I sent the attachment.
Okay, let's take public comment on this item. Okay, seeing none. Then, is there anything anyone wants to discuss before we move on to member reports? Okay, what's the next item?
Number 5, member reports. Member reports on committee-related activities not covered by another item on this agenda, including but not limited to the last Elections Commission meeting, Department of Elections progress, research findings, conferences, news, reports.
Okay, so on this item, I'll just say 2 quick things. Number 1, the city's budget process has started in earnest. The departmental requests are into the mayor's office, and then the mayor's office is basically making decisions right now. And And then the slalom report is still not finalized. The latest I've heard is that the director is planning to have that publicly available before the next commission meeting. And I also understand that the mayor's office is aware that this still needs to be finished and they're waiting on the report.
Chris, will you notify us when the slalom report comes out?
Yes.
Thanks.
Good, yeah.
So, yeah, and so anyone else want to report on things?
So I did some playing with open count. I got the documentation that exists, but every time I tried to use it, I got lots of errors. And I tried using the tutorial, but the scans are such poor quality, they're example scans, that it won't even run the tutorial. So I tried printing some ballots I got from Santa Clara and San Francisco, but then they didn't have all the right codes, so it choked on that, and I just got more errors. So I think the software might be usable for some things like figuring out where the scan positions are, but it would take some work to either rewrite it or clean it up and document it.
Is there anyone you're able to communicate with that actually developed Open Count?
I talked to one person, but it doesn't seem like there's any active work on it.
I mean, but what I'm saying is, have you tried establishing
I haven't contacted any of the developers as yet.
Okay.
I also found another project, the TEVS system that was used in Humboldt County, and I downloaded the ISO and tried to install it in a virtual machine, but it wouldn't boot. So I contacted the original guy, and he pushed me off onto another guy that's maintaining it, but then he blind copied and I didn't get a response, so I'll have to follow up on getting more. But that one actually looks kind of interesting. It's kind of unparalleled Open Count. I think it was done earlier than Open Count. It was active, I think, between 2008 and 2015.
What was it called?
TEVS. So if you'd like, I was planning on trying to get a hold of whoever's there and do some more investigation, and then I'll write up a proposed section for our background on parallel with the other open source software.
Okay. And are you still
Sounds good.
planning on trying to get a server up and running with the Prime 3?
Yeah, I just haven't
Okay.
had time to work on that, so.
I think that would be interesting.
There is an incomplete demo online that I put a link in from last time, but it doesn't include the audio interface.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I'll update that regrettably. I have been swamped and not had time to do the things that I promised to do last month, which were also the things that I was going to do the month before that, but then I was sick, and it turns out that when you're sick, you incur backlog, not just for open source voting, but also the other things that you do. So I'm digging myself out of that hole. And my first priority for open source voting things is to actually write the slides for a talk that I have to give in March, because the conference people want them.
Yeah, and we've authorized you to give that talk, so you know, if you'd like the link to the slides that I gave, I'm not sure if you have.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, actually, if you could share that with me, that would be lovely. I'm probably going to spend most of my Saturday this weekend working on that, because the people that run the conference also didn't communicate this in advance, but now said oh, by the way, we would like a PDF of your slides in the next few days.
How long is the talk going to be?
I forget if I have a 30 or 40 minute or 45 minute slot, but it's somewhere in the ballpark.
Well, it's long.
So, yeah, I'll be glad to give you feedback or take a look if you'd like. I submitted proposals for a talk, for multiple talks at OSCON, which is in July, and 2 of them got rejected. And the one for open source voting I've not yet received a decision, but the fact that I haven't heard back is a good sign.
Great.
So That would be a 40-minute session at a leading open source conference. So we'll see.
When is OSCON again?
July 17th, that
Okay.
week. I
So
think.
it might actually make a lot of sense for the two of us to collaborate
Yeah.
on this thing, and then we can share.
Yeah. Look, we may have more news by July.
Absolutely, but then, yeah.
But yeah, and getting the framework right and the template and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and also I figured that I thought maybe this would be a good agenda item for me to just respond to a few different questions that came up at the last meeting that you thought, there were times where you thought maybe Chris would be able to say something, but one was the question of how does the department sort its open mail ballots? And they use a piece of equipment called the Agilis mail sorter, and I think the department has 2 of those, and it has its own software. I think it integrates with the department's IAMS system, which is the voter registration system, and it's separate from the voting system. Another topic that came up was...
So can I ask a question on that? So how do the envelopes get opened and unfolded for scanning?
That is also a part of the Agilis. It's a mail sorter opener.
But it also does the opening?
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the topics that came up was the question of like electricity, if there's a power outage.
That was me.
Yeah, so the commission has not taken a position on this issue. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I think a lot of systems have a backup system where they can run off of battery.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if we were to say something about, being able to run without power, I mean, that's another option for that. Also, someone had mentioned about publishing the ranked choice voting ballot image data,
That was me.
and that's actually voluntarily done. It's not a requirement.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought it was part of like the permission that we got from the state to even have a methodology like that.
Oh, no, we don't even need permission. It's part of our charter, so.
Oh, we're a charter city. Of course we are, yeah.
Yeah.
So Humboldt, on that topic, Humboldt published their ballot images, scanned ballot images.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the TEVS system.
Yeah, those were pictures though, not images. I mean, those were actual pictures, whereas the ranked choice voting are just the digital.
They're just CVRs, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
CVRs. Another comment that came up was around the auditing 1% of precincts. And there's actually a second option where the state law allows you to audit 1% of like batches.
Mm-hmm.
So there's actually 2 different varieties there.
What's the definition of 1% of batches?
Well, it says that if you, like for example, if you're scanning vote by mail ballots, you don't necessarily have to sort them into precincts if you just put them into arbitrary batches, and you're allowed to select from those.
So are you allowed to audit 1% of the precinct votes by doing 1% of the precincts and then
Yes.
For VBM do the batches?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes it a lot more practical.
A later addition to the law.
Yeah, because otherwise you have to like sort it all out and then find
Exactly. And then the last comment was around the size of ballots in San Francisco. And I learned a couple years ago that the length and width of ballots can vary per election in San Francisco. The last election it was 9.75 inches by 16.5 inches. So I think that's a non-standard size.
Is it an even metric?
No, and I found the PDF from Santa Clara was 10.5 by 18, so they're kind of weird. But I'm not sure if that was cropped. It might be cropped, but it's about that size, about 10 inches by 17.
Yeah, but again, the interim system might have completely different dimensions. We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, 11 by 17 is a standard American size.
Well, also 8.5 by 14.
Yeah.
Oh, is that Larry?
No.
Do you want to just check outside?
See who that is?
But anyway, it does seem that there's a lot of very weird paper sizes used on ballots.
Sorry, I might.
Okay, so it's
There's a
6:30
chair
PM
for it.
and member Buffino has arrived. We're on agenda item number 5.
Five.
Okay, and also on this related, the department does use the same dimensions for precinct and vote by mail. Although you're not allowed to scan vote by mail through the precinct scanners.
But are the cards otherwise the same, or
I think, I'm not sure.
significantly the same? Okay.
Well, I guess, Chris, you mentioned that they were folded. The mail ballots have a fold in them.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because they need to fit in an envelope, so then they're probably slightly different.
Yeah, so let's open it up to public comment on this item.
This is the member reports item, right? So maybe Larry has.
Oh, good point. Do you have anything you'd like to?
Outside of addressing the commission last week.
Happy to hear about it
Do
too.
that, yeah. So we can discuss it as well.
Yeah, I mean, in short, I gave a very brief update on our activities to the commission. Talked about the latest iteration of our report. Some of the events that members of the committee here have been speaking at or plan to speak at in terms of promoting the work that we're doing here and the value of open source and voting. That's pretty much it. It's a brief update.
Did you get any interesting questions? Did you get any interesting questions?
None. Which may be interesting in itself.
Well, it's been the norm, I think.
Yeah.
I guess in terms of talking about the work that we're doing, I did mention that areas that we wanted to round out in the report, maybe continue to think about moving forward are secure boot and additional maybe recommendations around agile procurement. Those are two things I mentioned.
Yeah, and we'll get to those items later today. Okay, thank you. Let's do a public comment on this item. Okay, seeing none. Is there anyone else who wants to say anything before we move on? No? Okay, next item.
Item 6, project background and terminology. Discussion and possible action regarding project background and terminology, including other voting system projects.
Okay, yeah, so I don't have anything on this topic. We don't have to discuss anything, but if anyone would like to.
So one thing we mentioned last week was my additions are updates to the Prime 3 system, and that was state of New Hampshire. They did more work and they came out with a revised version of Prime 3 called One for All. And so there's some links that are now in the report. And one of the links also is a letter from the New Hampshire Secretary of State promoting their One for All system to the California Association of Voting Officials, whatever it is. But I couldn't find any other information about One for All other than the training videos and demo videos. There's no known location of source code, so I thought maybe we should contact the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office to see what we could find out about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, that's something I wanted to mention. Yeah, so I would be happy to reach out to.
Since you're a San Francisco election official, it might be good for you.
Yeah, so what information would people like me to find out from New Hampshire? You know, whether the code is open source, or if not, when it will be made available?
Or is there a location where we could find out more information about it? You know, URL.
What else?
I don't know if we can download a demo.
There was some news coverage around the either 2016 or 2017 election about it having been used in a local election for the first time in Concord, I think. And at the time, I expressed surprise because, as far as I know, it's been used for statewide elections for quite a long time. And the news article didn't really go into specifics about what it is that they had adapted to make it work for a local election, or sort of what the problems were, or anything along those lines. So it was like this 12-year-old system is now being used for Y in addition to X. And my question was, okay, so why did it take 12 years?
So I guess two questions I have is, what are their plans for the 2018?
Yeah, what's the rollout? Is there a roadmap?
Where is it deployed? Where is it going to be
And,
deployed?
like, how many precincts use it, across the state, or how many counties or polling locations, have that?
For 2018 or?
Well,
for
or the past, or their plans for this year?
Yeah, and I'd also be interested in, is it just the ballot marking, or is it also the tabulation and scanning? I don't know.
Prime 3 doesn't have any tabulation. So I believe that, one of the things they said they did, and it may depend on the county, was that they altered the printing so it can do a ballot of an optical mark ballot card. You can feed in the printer a regular hand-marked ballot, and it will mark it.
Okay. All right, so I'm happy to try to learn that information for the next meeting. Okay, anything else on this topic? Background terminology. We do have still a lot of terms that don't have definitions yet. Someone would like to volunteer?
I can volunteer to do some
Okay,
of those
great.
for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take public comment on this item. Let's look
Good evening. My name is David Carey, and I'm here tonight representing the California Clean Money Campaign. Trent Lang would have liked to have been here this evening, but he wasn't able to make it. Trent's the president of the California Clean Money Campaign. The California Clean Money Campaign recently took a position in support of the open source voting system project that San Francisco is pursuing. And they're interested in going a little bit further in terms of working to facilitate some state matching funds that are specifically for open source voting system projects. And so the message tonight for this group is that we encourage you to do whatever you can to provide some great input to the eventual plan for an open source voting system project, and particularly providing input that's on a timely basis, because we'd like to see some action in the state legislature here during this legislative session. And so anything that you can do to show to the legislature that San Francisco has a viable and attractive plan that's worth funding, we'd much appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Curry. Yes.
To go further there, I was in Sacramento yesterday at this informational hearing on cybersecurity for elections. And I won't go into that, it's on video. The most interesting part came about 2 hours and some odd minutes. I sent in an email where the senator, what's his name?
Ben Allen?
Ben Allen asked the registrars what they thought about open source. And Mr. Logan says, oh, we're using an open source platform, which I didn't immediately get until I talked with him afterwards. And he's talking about a programming platform.
Not Linux.
Source code,
Linux is a platform.
Huh?
Not Linux. Linux is a platform.
Linux is a platform, so Linux is not open source.
Yes, it is.
Election system.
Let's let the public
Okay,
speak.
sorry.
This is their time.
It's not an open source election system, and so I asked him, well, what's going to happen here? And he said, we anticipate publishing the code for the tabulator and the voting station, but that could be coming even after they've brought out a version or two, and that they are wanting to maintain some kind of control over who's going to be able to reuse the code. They want people to reuse it, but they just don't want it to go willy-nilly. So that's what I learned again, if you talk to people about this project, talk to Philip Ting, talk to David Chu. They're both on the budget committees for the respective houses. And talk to them about coming up with another 10 million to fund this project for R&D. They're both in San Francisco. They should be up there fighting for what we believe in. But they need some people to go in and knock on the doors. So thank you.
Can I ask you who Dean Logan is?
Registrar of Los Angeles County and
Okay,
President of the
that's what I thought.
CSEO.
Yeah, that's very interesting information about what Dean Logan said, and it's consistent with what we said about LA's project in our own document. There's sort of this ambiguity about whether it will be open source.
But I want to come back to this idea of platform, because if we're going to be open source, you can't build it on Windows or Mac OS. You have to use an open source operating system, and that doesn't leave you a lot of choices. It leaves you pretty much with a Linux variant. So when you say that it's not a voting platform,
I think my interpretation of his comment was that they weren't committing to the voting software itself being open source, but that it would run on an open source platform.
okay, but
Which
for
is
us,
relatively meaningless.
that's likely to be an issue.
I mean, it's necessary, but far from sufficient condition, right?
Yeah.
And
I think that was the
actually,
point.
we have a recommendation around
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
platform.
I know.
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
Oh, one thing I was going to mention on the glossary, that the voluntary voter standards committees of NIST are developing a new, more comprehensive glossary. It's in the works, so I'm not sure if anything can be shared there, or maybe even just link to it.
Okay. Well, maybe.
It's still, I think,
take
in
a look at
an
that.
early stage
Maybe
now.
Take a look at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to contribute on that one anyway.
Okay. All right. So anything else on this item? We've already had public comment. Okay, so let's move on to the next item.
Item 7, project management and procurement. Discussion and possible action regarding project management and procurement, including topics like modular contracting, agile development, and government and incremental approaches to the project.
Okay, so does anyone have anything they'd like to say on this item?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I understand this is an area in which we want to continue to refine our thinking and formalize recommendations. If there are resources we need from the USDS 18F community, we can continue. I can help with that. I can take that as an action item if we need to. But if we are also talking about what exactly we want to recommend, I think there are some things that we have already in which we can say, like principles of an approach. You know, maybe even recommending specific pieces of the system and sequencing as that relates to a procurement strategy. So, all that being said, I guess what my point is that if there are resources, we can get them. But I also think that we have enough to at least describe the principles of an approach or high-level recommendations based on the information we have so far. So I guess I'm curious as to where that we feel as a group we're at.
So I went to this USDS recruiting event. Yeah, and there was somebody there. I think his last name was Stoddard. Do you know? No, I have his contact information. Patrick, I think, and he, I guess, does works with groups to do agile procurement. So it's exactly in this space. So it's conceivable that we might want to try to arrange a conference call, or maybe he's published some documents and guidelines that's probably worth following up.
Yeah, I think it would be, it's a great idea to invite that person, and maybe between the two of you, you can see if you'd be interested, do something similar to what we did before. But to your point about you know, the different things we can recommend. We do currently have recommendations around the actual components, and actually it's something we're going to discuss again later today. But I think what we don't have a lot of information on is specific recommendation around like the procurement stuff. You know, how do you, the nuts and bolts of that. And one thing I wanted to ask you was if you could still follow up with, her name was Jessica, right?
Yeah.
If she had said that she had some resources, maybe samples, things. It sounded like she had specific things in mind that she could send us.
She does, but I think the opportunity she has in mind is work that ETNF is doing with Alaska around procurement consulting, specifically around the administration of Medicaid and Medicare services through Alaska. And that repo is public, so we have full access to a number of resources and samples that ETNF is helping them develop. So I think we can mine, if you want, I have to do this selfishly for myself anyway in my new role, so I can summarize some of the contents and see what we can gather.
Maybe just draft up some text for our document that links to that stuff. That'd be good. We can even, you know, read some of it for.
Sure.
Okay. And, so anything else on this? And the stuff about the components is for the next item. We can get into that. Okay, let's do public comment on this item, agenda item number 7. Okay, seeing none. Okay, so you're going to reach out to the USDS person.
Yeah.
And then you're going to get in touch with Jesse, or you already know that links are.
I'll look at the
Okay.
repo and see what we can have
Great.
and follow up with her if necessary.
Okay, great. All right, next item.
Item 8, equipment decisions and implementation plan. Discussion and possible action regarding implementation plans for open source voting, including timelines as well as decisions that need to be made regarding voting process and equipment.
Okay, so this is our biggest item tonight, I think. We've got 6 different documents to go along with this item. And we can kind of talk about the order, but let's just kind of review what these documents are. So I have 2 sets of suggestions. They're mostly more organizational things. There's not a lot of new text. I think that would be relatively quick. One of them has a little bit of text around language around accessibility. And then Carl, you have a pretty long document around security issues.
Right.
And then
there's also a letter that you want to send to the budget people.
yeah, and so lastly, there's a document I put together today. It's unfortunately I got it together late, but it's relatively short. I'm hoping we'd have time to review it tonight. But I think it's very timely because I think if we were to communicate to the commission what we think should be funded first, that would really help
Yeah,
in what's going on right now at the city level.
absolutely.
So I kind of think, because Carl, your document is pretty long, I think maybe we could do that at the end.
Sure.
Just keep it more open-ended. And then the question is, do we want to review recommendation language now, or do you want to do that a little bit, do some of the other easier changes first?
By recommendation language, you mean the budget letter?
Yeah.
I have no opinion either way, so it's, the diffs are, the changes, suggestion number 1 and suggestion number 2 from you, as I understand it, are both pretty easy. Like, suggestion number 1 is like a 13-page diff or something, but
Well,
my understanding is that all you did is move stuff around, right?
yeah, and so, yeah, why don't we just do these first, because
Mhm.
they are pretty easy. And the 13-page one's deceptive. It's actually, it got double-spaced and formatted. A
Oh.
little weird, so it's actually.
Oh, I see, it's actually, yeah, the formatting is horrible.
So
Sorry
let's,
about that.
let's do the suggestion
Fine.
number 1 first. So what I did here was, a few meetings ago, we kind of did an open-ended review of one of the sections, and one of the major feedback was separating the list of components from or recommendations about the order in which they should be developed. And so what I did was I consolidated it into a single list. and then I separated out the stuff recommending an order into a different section. Okay. So there's a new section called components that lists, there's like 17 different components. And it's just the components we had already listed. And then some of those components have, it's drilled down into more detail. And the listing is on page 2 of this document. And for members of the public, if any of you would like a copy of any of these documents, just let us know and we can get, you want one?
It's online. It's online. Okay.
Be careful what you wish for.
Mm.
That's
It's also in
one
there.
fact. And then the reason that this diff is long is because the headers are just renumbered to a different level. So,
Okay, so the most meaningful part is page 2, you said,
well, page 2 gives you an idea of what the section covers. It
Mhm.
just gives you the listing we have so far, if you want to review that. There's 4 hardware components and 13 software components.
So, question, did you change ballot layout analyzer to encoder?
Yeah, and there's one other thing. Actually, Don, do you have the PDF summarizing the changes here?
Yeah, it's before the, here, you can
It should be
have
in
it.
front of each one of the suggestions.
It looks like this.
Yeah, and that.
Okay.
So the other thing was, because when I combined the 2 sections, there was a new, there was a single list, there's 2 ballot layout related components. One is a component that would let us kind of convert the interim system's ballot layout into a format that we can use for the open source scanner. And that was called, we had called that ballot layout analyzer, but I think ballot layout encoder would be a better word, because it's really the, I think what we
Right, it doesn't
want
perform
out of it.
analysis.
Yeah, it doesn't perform analysis. And then the other one is just, we had a component called ballot layout, and really, that's going to be ambiguous if we have both of those, so the other one's called ballot layout creator. One word, that would be for designing the ballot layouts for the open source system. So,
Let's see, yeah. Okay, so this is just administrative, right? Like it's just moving,
yeah, it's,
there are no substantive changes that I can find in this
yeah,
at all.
it's moving these sections, and then renaming those 2 components, and then that's it.
Looks good to me.
And then also this other section that's left, which is again language we approved before, it's just, it outlines, kind of the early phase that we had agreed on. Doing central ballot scanning and results reporting and things.
So, a question, I guess on the very first page of this section, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are these the things that we think we should do in that order?
What is it? What are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Results reporting, ballot tabulation, central scanner, ballot auditing, ballot layout encoding.
Are you on
I guess,
page?
but these are,
That's the document we're not discussing right now.
Oh.
That.
No, yeah, you're looking at the wrong
section.
document.
Yeah.
well, the question was, do we have a set order for the
So this
the
does
order, the
create,
sequence we should do these things in?
this creates a chapter 7 called implementation order. The changes we're not discussing.
Okay.
And so on page 11, you can see not all of it, because the context gets clipped, but the new section 7.1, which is currently section 5.1, does appear to be talking about a preferred order.
Yeah, so
See, because there's like ballot layout encoding.
So this but we could discuss this later, but this is just meant to be as a group, these are the first things. And
Okay,
and
that was my question.
Okay.
Is it just a group of things, or is it are they like an individual, do this, then this, then this?
Yeah, it's a
And-
group.
Okay,
And we can close that.
that's fine.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so, yeah, so this is an organizational one.
Oh.
And
Yeah, I read through it and I'm impressed with it. And I read the diff of the other one on the train already.
oh, that number one?
Suggestion number 2, the diff of that I read on the train already. And I looked at your language around accessibility and I thought it was good.
Okay, so let's do number one first. Does someone want to make a motion for number one? This is the one around the component listing.
Just reorganizing. I will move to adopt that one as written.
A second.
Okay, let's take public comment on this item, agenda item as a whole. And this is around implementation plan and equipment decisions. Anyone like to? Okay, seeing no public comment. Is there any further discussion on this first motion? Okay, Secretary Chan?
Chair Giordani,
Yes.
Vice Chair Profundo,
Yes.
Member Hay,
Yes.
Member Catal,
Yes.
Member Wasserman.
Yes.
It carries unanimously.
Okay, so the suggestion number 2 is, it basically takes what you had discussed at the last meeting, the new language that Carl wrote, and it breaks it out into its own top-level section. You know, calling it equipment.
The key decision.
Yeah, calling it equipment, and then in parentheses, product.
Okay.
And I would suggest that should go before it'll be the last section before the FAQ. And then, in addition, I basically, because I wasn't at the meeting, I just wanted to look it over and see if I had any suggestions, and there was some language around accessibility that I thought could be improved a little bit. And I'll just tell you kind of the main suggestion there was, rather than focusing on the equipment being for disabled voters, people with disabilities, I think the emphasis should be on, this is a machine that's accessible. And like, people with disabilities are one group of people that can use it, but it's really something that anyone can use.
Yeah, and a lot of the language seems to be about people preferring or needing. The first thing I spot here says people preferring or needing an accessible option.
Yeah.
And other places, it also talks in similar language about voters not requiring an accessible option.
And I think it's sort of in line with the department and actually some of the comments from the Disability Rights California want to emphasize that these are machines that anyone can use. And they might not have a disability, per se. But. So, I think there may have been. Oh, and there was one other comment. And there was one other pro I added to have the, and this is the question of whether all voters should use the accessible device or not, or whether people that don't need an accessible machine should vote on a hand-marked paper ballot. The additional pro I added was that if there's a single process, then it's easier to ensure that everyone is having the same level of experience, because you don't have different processes.
And the same quality experience, so you're not going to fall into the trap of the accessible voting experience being worse.
Right.
Because there is only one experience.
Yeah, so I don't think that was really listed as a pro. But, so that's that set of suggestions.
I had missed that in my previous reading of this, actually, so thank you.
I think one of the changes that I added also in my proposed changes that didn't make it, we'll have to discuss next, was that using machine, there's no ambiguous or erroneous marks, so it eliminates a lot of the need for adjudication.
That's true.
So anyway, that'll be in the next month's proposal. I already had it, but the diff I sent was the wrong one because of my mouse click.
Oh, yeah. I'm actually, go ahead.
What's that?
Oh, no, never mind.
Well, I was gonna say, if it's a matter of like one sentence, we could even do it now.
Well, we could do it now just to insert that, but I was gonna just suggest that you add, one of the pros is that it eliminates marking erroneous or ambiguous marks that would otherwise require adjudication.
Okay, do you want people to agree with that?
Mhm. And this is to go for which section?
It's on the section where everybody uses voting machines.
Is that
Or the-
6.4?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay, so, someone wanna make a motion on this?
I guess I would move that we approve the reorganization here
With the assertion that you mentioned?
with the insertion, yes.
I'll second that.
Okay, and let's just give another opportunity for public comment on this item. Okay, seeing none?
So,
Then,
and I just want to say, Chris, you can figure out how to word that addition for elimination of errors and ambiguities.
well, I'll just go off what you said in the audio.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounded good to me. All right, so seeing no further discussion, Secretary Chan?
Okay. Chair Giordano.
Yes.
Vice Chair Butunda.
Yes.
Member Hague.
Yes.
Member Catal.
Yes.
Member Wasserman.
Yes.
It carries unanimously.
Okay, so then the next thing is this, this two-page, I guess it could be a letter that we submit, but,
Well, that's back at the beginning.
kind of related to the
Yeah.
budget process going on right now. And basically, so this is a document that kind of articulates some of the things that are already in our recommendations, but it's specific to the budget process. And I thought that it would be important for us to kind of highlight to the commission that what we think should be, the city should work on in the first year.
And so this goes to the Elections Commission,
Yeah, this is going to be like.
which would then have to, so perhaps you can clarify just some points of process there. Would the Elections Commission then have to action this and send their own letter onto some other authority, or are they more directly involved in the city budget process?
Well, I think, I mean, I'm planning to have the commission vote to write such a letter.
Okay.
Based on this, yeah.
So I also, like, I don't know how in the weeds you want to get about it, but like, what in general terms is the Election Commission's involvement or non-involvement with the budget process as a whole?
Well, the commission authorized me to meet with people within the city.
Mhm.
So I'm actually actively meeting with people in the city. And I can even reference this motion today if we pass it even
Right,
before it gets. to
even
the
before it gets to
commission.
the commission, yeah.
Yeah,
It just won't be a thing that the commission has approved yet, it will be a thing that we have approved.
exactly. But,
So
although-
they've approved you, they've appointed you as their liaison for such things.
yeah, and I mean, the fact that I agree with it would hold a lot of weight, I think,
Mhm.
so. So, and I think it's appropriate for us to say this, even though the Slalom report hasn't come out yet. It's just been delayed, I think.
What's the delay?
It's just taking longer, I think.
They haven't submitted.
Well, there was some drafts that were, internal drafts they circulated, and they're incorporating feedback, and I think they're just going back and forth a couple times.
Have you seen the draft?
Yeah.
Can you comment on it?
Not, I think not really.
A draft of what, sorry?
The Slalom.
Feasibility study.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Hopefully they took the word benevolent dictator out.
Oh, I did mention to them that we had suggested that. I will say that I had a chance to give fairly substantial feedback on the document, so I don't know, I haven't had a chance to see whether they've included it yet.
My concern with that report, without seeing it, has always been that it would be perceived without sufficient context.
What do you mean by that?
Well, then maybe we just wait till we actually see the report, but my assumption is it's gonna unearth the realities and the complexities and the uncertainty associated with an effort like this, and that's going to be something that scares people.
Good. But, I mean, this is just one piece of the process, one
Exactly.
stage of the process.
Right.
So, yeah, and I think actually this is one reason why a statement like this from us can help, because we can try and alleviate those uncertainties.
So I thought your rationale on the second page was very good.
Oh, we just got there, okay. I'm really happy. I'm just at the end of page 1 right now. I'm really happy with your second paragraph that you're arguing that that the Department of Elections hire a full-time staff person that can be the project lead, that has significant technical expertise. Like, that has been my #1 concern about this project, is who on the Department of Elections side, or on the city side in general, like, manages this, because that's going to be fairly critical.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy that you're suggesting that they do that up front. I think you have present some really good arguments. Also, the fact that they are slammed right now with having to run 2 elections in the same year, one of which turned out to be a much bigger deal than originally anticipated as well.
Yeah, and my understanding from the budget process is they need to, like, in the budget, allocate money for a position, so it's.
Yes, yeah, that's how budget processes tend to work, yeah.
I know, actually this might be worth raising here, but I know, Tony, that you have in the past mentioned something about how much they're paying the person.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
you thought the person before was not being paid enough, or?
I think when they put out the original rec, it was a salary that was kind of down there at the level of school teachers. And, you know, that's just not enough to attract a first-rate project manager for something that we all view as critical project, so.
When you say school teacher, am I to infer that it was 5 figures?
It was.
Yeah, that's
I
not.
don't think so, is it?
It was under 100,000, yes, it was.
Yeah, if you want to get a good project manager in San Francisco, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you're gonna have to go to 120 plus benefits.
But that wasn't for this role.
Huh?
That wasn't for this role.
That was for someone to help them write RFPs, right?
Right.
Like, the most recent thing that they couldn't hire someone for was to help them write RFPs.
Right, but
Yeah.
the original rec that they put out for somebody, and if I remember correctly, the Elections Commission guy, I don't know his name,
Arnst?
Arnst,
Director.
director, he decided to do it himself because he couldn't
Yeah.
hire anybody.
That was the RFP writing thing, though. That was not this.
On the flip side, though, I think people that were applying for that position were overqualified,
Yeah.
so maybe this would.
So he might have an applicant pool for this kind of work.
So Tony, do you think we should put something in here?
I
Maybe
think-
something about.
I
how much-
think that it only needs a word or two, which, to the effect that people with these characteristics are very much in demand in our area, and so the salary should be set accordingly, just to make, we don't need to state a number.
Do we want to say market rate, or just maybe?
Well, you know, market rate is a funny thing,
Yeah.
because there are certain companies that pay above market rate.
Okay.
So,
I think the most important, I don't know how you word this, but I think the most important part of it is that I think, you know, I work in the nonprofit sector, right? Like,
Yeah.
people taking a pay cut to work for good is a thing, that's a thing that happens at our organization. But at the same time, you also need to not, there's also like such a thing as a salary that's so low that you can't afford to take it, right? And that's a situation that we at least need to prevent.
yeah, and you know, and I think that in line with nonprofit salaries, this is fine. I mean, we're not going to match Facebook or Google. You know, they attract a different kind of person. I mean, as opposed to people who are used to working in government and NGOs and those kinds of places.
I would even suggest one other potential change here, and referring to this person as the project owner or the project lead as opposed to a project lead. And my only point there is that
That's a good point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What we want in government, especially in government, large government technology projects, is accountability and ownership and empowered decision makers. And I know this person's not going to have all of that, but to the degree that we can encourage it, we should.
Yeah, but this comes back to things that are in the recommendations. This is because it ties together with agile processes and project owners and user
We
stories.
should call them product owner, not project manager.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great suggestion.
I mean, it's called Project Lead right now, which
I mean, we could
I
say
think it's fine. We can do
project
whatever.
lead / product owner.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that too. But I do agree that like having it say the
Yeah.
is a good signal. And in terms of like what you said, Larry, about empowerment, I think it's good that this stipulates that the person should report directly to the director, which will give them, that'll give them as much power as they can possibly be given without being a director, I guess.
And I think we do want to have the director be accountable ultimately.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
Makes sense.
that's the
The director is the owner in some way.
That's the role.
But lead, I thought that was a good word.
yeah.
Well, if the director is the owner, do we still want to say product owner?
Well, product owner is kind of a jargony term in the industry, right?
Yeah.
It means the person that you talk to find out what requirements are and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And the person that has the most direct vested interest in the project turning out well.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
but-
it's product owner, not project.
Product
Yeah.
owner, yeah.
And it gets tied up in this whole notion of product management. So when you list here, these are the things that we should do first, these are priorities, then you get this person who can respond to queries from whoever is doing the implementation. What's the priority? What should I work on? What deliverable do we need to have when? They're going to be. We're anticipating phased deliveries, incremental, release early, release often kind of approach.
And that's a different skill set. I mean, there's an execution skill set,
Yeah.
which is pure project management, and then product management is
Yeah.
more about what's most important to do and why.
Yeah, but once you start, kicking, I mean, when we use the term lead, it implies that somebody has already said, here's what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and the order in which we're going to do it, and the lead kind of follows those rules and tries to make that happen. Whereas owner says, hey, the buck stops here, this is my call, and
I mean, I think-
my boss is going to back me up, in effect. And so we're somewhere in the middle, I think.
Well, I think you got to consider the audience, right? Like, product owner is a sufficiently jargony term that people from outside the industry are not going to immediately understand what it means. But I think project lead is something that's going to be much more understandable to like people.
Maybe we say project lead with,
Or / or parentheses or something.
no, project manager with the authority to do X, which in effect keeps the project lead name, but assigns some, plus responsibilities to indicate that the person is going to have more.
Their authority is never going to exceed the director, though, I think.
No, of course not. But still, to if we imagine some of the things that could happen, there could be prioritization changes. There could be schedule adjustments.
It does say once hired, this person can work with key stakeholders to decide next steps from a project management perspective. So that is spelled out as a responsibility. We could more explicitly spell out
Yeah.
that we think that they should have certain authority.
Yeah, I think we're on the right track here.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if you want to suggest specific language, I think right now we've got the project lead / product owner, but if you want to.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely okay. I mean, all the words are in here, and then it boils down to who actually is wearing the hat to make it happen.
So, if y'all don't mind, I have some other more minor questions and critiques of this document. I mean, overall, I think it's clear that I love it. Carl had a concern about order of things.
Yeah.
A simple change that we could make if we wanted to, and I don't know what your style preferences there are, is turn a numbered list on page 1 into a bulleted list
That's a good point.
to sort of remove the suggestion of order.
I think that's a good solution.
Yeah,
And what do you think
then-
about saying, maybe even saying the following components be developed and certified in the next phase, to make clear that we want as a unit?
You could say the following set of components.
Or the
Keep,
initial phase.
I like the word first,
Okay, okay.
Um,
Okay, let's,
because in the next phase, like, conjures a lot of
yeah,
like lack of context around like what other phases are there. Are there phases that have preceded this?
okay.
So I like the word first, but you could say set of components,
Okay, let's set
for
up.
example. And then on page 2, you have another list. I love points 2 through 5. I am really confused about the first half sentence or so in number 1.
Okay, so the reason here is that just the first half or the whole thing?
The first half, but like I felt like when I had read the first half sentence, I didn't know what I was reading yet.
Okay, well, the point is that if someone might say, well, why don't we build the accessible device first?
Okay.
Or why don't we do the precinct-based scanner first? And the point here is that there's no deployment strategy I can think of where we can deploy an accessible device and have it working in conjunction with
Right.
the interim system. Because the interim system is not going to be able to scan.
Oh, I think I've also identified why I was so grammatically confused. What do you think about
Yeah, and it
changing
is hard-
unlike
it is
to
hard.
unlike with?
yeah, the word like is a problem.
Or use such as instead of
Yeah.
unlike like.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, but also unlike with components, because unlike components, then I expect the next thing to be a different component, and instead it says there is. And I was grammatically confused and reread the sentence to try and figure out what the structure was, but I think if you change to unlike with, and I'm sorry for like
This is
being
fine.
nitpicking
No,
brigade
it's
here.
fine. And maybe even the fact that it says unlike followed by like is another confusing thing. I don't know.
Yeah, just change the second like to such as or some other.
Okay, so
Word.
maybe, so unlike with components such as,
You know what this reminds me of? Off topic. When I was a kid, when they were allowed to do TV commercials for cigarettes, there's a brand called Winston, and their tagline was "Winston tastes good like a cigarette should."
Oh,
And
instead of
every
as.
year, the English teachers would go completely bonkers on this line. They'd say, "No, Winston tastes good as a cigarette should." And, end of off-topic comment.
Or you could also change the sentence to say, phasing in the above components has a workable strategy unlike precinct scanners.
yeah, that's actually.
It might,
I like
just
that.
might be
Yeah.
less confusing.
Yeah, because the unlike clause is so long, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it's-
you don't know what the main.
Yeah,
Yeah, just like swap around the order of that sentence.
It's like the German interpreter is waiting for the verb.
Yeah.
so can you repeat what you said?
Oh, I just said,
Begin the sentence with "there is a workable strategy," and then move the unlike to somewhere else in the sentence.
yeah, there is a workable strategy of gradually phasing in the above components, unlike,
We could even say unlike an accessible ballot marking device
Yeah.
or a precinct-based scanner.
which, well, basically the thing is with a ballot marking device, you need to have a pretty complete
Yeah.
collection of hardware and software.
And then maybe just end the sentence there and then say, the components can be phased in alongside and eventually replacing the corresponding components in the regular system.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's.
I mean,
let's do
I'm
that.
happy for us to approve this with some with unspecified sentence refactoring to be done by you.
And then also, just a little bit more, I was planning on, I mean, I'm thinking we could put this on a, sort of like our letterhead, like we do with our quarterly reports. And then it also references our recommendations document for more.
I was happy to see that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, overall, this letter makes me really happy, and like points 2 through 5 are all my favorite things from the recommendations document distilled into half a page.
Okay, since you like number 1, you don't seem to like number 1 so much, should we put that last? Or?
Actually, I was going to bring that up next, because, and you know, maybe this is another bullet list, number list thing or whatever, but like you having it as number 1, like it creates the impression that that is like one of the main reasons why, and maybe that's true.
Well, it's more of an argument against the other components. Is really
Yeah.
what it is. So we can move it last.
So,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Go on.
oh, I thought,
Go ahead.
so this is the tiniest of tiny things. Under item 4, you've numbered things 1 and 2, and maybe they're better if they're A and B.
Yeah, or not even number them.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
And the word like also appears there, and it might be replaced by
Yeah.
such as.
I'm happy with that one. There's no unlike conflict there.
I know, but
We'll leave it up to you. What do you,
All
A,
right.
1, 2, nothing? What do you think?
no, just not 1, 2.
Okay, let's do A, B, nothing.
Yeah.
I also want to thank you very much, Chris, for having the foresight to write this and writing such a good one.
Oh, thanks. Well, the foresight only manifested maybe last night, so.
I did
On,
notice that one of the diffs that we reviewed, that I said I had reviewed in the train, I noticed that was mostly an accident because you created at 3 p.m. today.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Okay.
only 3 hours before the meeting, but I managed to read on the train here anyway.
So the dash at the top of page 2 maybe should be a colon.
Okay.
Yeah, agreed. I think,
Picky.
yeah, given that we've gotten to this level of
My
nitpickiness
grammar
already.
teacher told me to use dash if what precedes is not a complete sentence.
Oh.
But
Yeah, but we have,
Oh.
But I mean,
we have lots of complete sentences.
I'm okay with
Yeah, okay,
colon's fine.
okay,
Maybe
given
s-
that that's the level of nitpickiness that we've gotten to, are we
Yeah.
ready to
It-
approve? I'll
It's-
just be bold and make a motion that we approve this, and if other people have other things they didn't like about it, we can talk about that.
I second the motion.
Yeah.
Okay, since we've got a big agenda item, let's do one more public comment on this item. Anyone like to comment? Okay, seeing none. Further committee discussion before we take a vote?
Aren't we generally required to do public comment for every vote anyway, or is that?
No, just
Ah,
once per item, as long as
interesting.
it's before the first vote.
Huh.
Yeah. But it's more of a courtesy thing.
It is a courteous thing to do.
As an aside, do we imagine the city having to acquire or redesign new ballots to work with the new system depending on the components that are ultimately selected? Like the types of scanners that are selected or the tally devices?
Or the open sources.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna have to design a ballot, I mean, no matter what.
It's not an official component of the election system,
But
though,
I
right?
think the ballot layout software that is now is part of the scanning vendors
Yeah, it's
system.
currently proprietary.
So if you don't use their scanners, then you may not be able to use the software for ballot layout.
So it's a software, but I'm talking about the physical ballots, like we, today haven't talked about, like, I don't know if we need to, but recommendations around like physical ballot design.
Oh, there's a lot of state laws on that. There's a whole, you have to use certified printers.
Yeah,
And there's a whole bunch of regulations, so.
and depending on the hardware that's ultimately selected, throughput requirements of the city, like you may have certain requirements around what materials you use and thickness and things like that. Just calling it out, I don't know if, I think the ballot is actually not part of the official voting system according to the whatever that's called.
VVPAT? A VVC, yeah.
It's just it's not necessarily an open source element, but It's part of what's
Well,
gonna make it.
ballot layout software can be, but.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that we have plenty of time to revisit it.
Mhm.
We'll work on this. So, okay.
Yeah, my impression is that all the printing and cards is pretty set by the election officials, and they know what to do.
I'll also call out that the RFP that I just skimmed, while we were talking about everything, I skimmed the RFP that was in the packet for last month. It explicitly requires that any bids for the interim system, that there's a certain amount of interoperability, and that the vendor agrees that interoperability requirements are limited, but that the vendor agrees that the old and new systems may be used in parallel parts of each. So what Carl said is partly true, if you,
All pieces.
yeah, I mean, there's pretty broad language in there saying that as a vendor, when you bid on this RFP, that the city might end up using 3/4 of your system and 1/4 of an open source system, and that's okay.
Okay.
That's not, and so what Carl said is true in a practical sense too. The ballot layout can have ties to how it's scanned, of course, and just in terms of implementation, but it does look like Director Arneson writing this RFP has taken steps to make sure that is not a legal impediment.
Okay.
Where we enter into a contract and forbid us from doing it.
And this letter here is not saying we should build that component yet.
That's
It's just
it,
saying
yeah.
we adapt whatever the interim system.
Right, we would be scanning existing ballots with this.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, Secretary Jim?
Chair Judonic,
Yes.
Vice Chair Profundo,
Yes.
Member Hay,
Yes?
Member Catal,
Yes?
Member Wasserman.
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
Okay, great. So what I'll do is, I'll, format this like we discussed, changes, and then I'll CC the committee when it's sent to the commission. And it'll be a part of the packet for the next meeting, commission meeting.
So that means that since I'm the person who's going to be at the election commission, I should be prepared to discuss this.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
I also wrote down while I was skimming the RFP, I wrote down a partial list of things I liked about the RFP, which I will send on to you, and they might not, you of course are free to have your own opinion, but I thought it would be a good seed for you as well.
Your opinion is most welcome, and I find that we are largely in agreement on these issues.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think when was the last time we had a split vote on anything?
Never?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've had people absent votes, but not
Yeah,
split.
I don't think anyone's ever voted no on anything.
Only on meeting times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, all right, so let's, okay, well, great, Carl, let's turn it over to you for your security.
Okay,
document.
well,
so
we have to wait for
Donna's to call
our
next item.
secretary to call the next
Oh, yeah,
agenda.
part 8, item 8.
Oh, we have to wait for Don to do what?
To call the next item.
No, this is still on this item.
Oh, are we still on 8?
Under 7?
Yeah, we're still on 8.
Oh,
So, Carl,
Oh, for the security stuff?
well, this was under key decisions, right? You had-
It was under recommendations. Well, I don't know, it used to be under the recommendations document, so I don't know where it actually belongs.
Okay, I, when looking at the PDF, I didn't see the next section header. Okay, it's a new level. So, yeah, then, next item.
item 9 then. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Item 9, committee recommendations. Discussion and possible action regarding committee recommendations on the subjects of requirements, open source, software development processes, software architecture and design, hardware, intellectual property, and testing.
Okay, so Carl. you-
Okay, so first tear off the first page, that's the text document, that is the wrong one, so.
So that one's just
I'll have to
garbage?
resubmit it next month.
Okay, so there's a part of this this one is garbage, and then there's a part that's missing. Is that what you're saying?
Well, when I sent the file,
Uh-huh.
I missed and I hit the file above it.
Okay, so this one is not just extraneous, it's actually replacing something else that should have been there.
Yeah, although Carl, thank you for adjusting your build script so that it works now with operating systems that don't have their locale set correctly. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, that's always good.
Well, in the earlier version, you had set UTF encoding explicitly, and then you
Yes.
took it out and that's what happened, so anyway.
Right.
I was the guinea pig.
Mm-hmm.
So just to, the next page, that's the PDF file that was printed. It begins with section 5.3.2. And I guess I just felt inspired to write some stuff on cryptography. I wanted to define the basic aspects of cryptography and data security, and then also explain how it could be used within the voting system. So I'm not sure what procedure we want to do, or if you think it's good in general, or we should put this as a separate document, or...
Well, so I have kind of an overall question. How much of this is a recommendation versus background information?
Most of this here is...
Where you're saying we should do a
Well,
particular thing? Or?
This is a lot
This
of
is sort of a
background.
lead up to getting to the recommendations. So I didn't,
Yeah.
I guess I could have put some recommendations in there, but I did.
Yeah,
thought
all
we'd
of this
go
is background,
through
I would argue.
All of this, so you could consider it background.
Yeah, in that case, I think it should either go
Yeah.
as a subsection or background section, or else as an appendix, depending on how
Yeah.
in the weeds it is.
I would argue for this as an appendix, actually.
It
I
might be
think it's-
better off.
I think it's, even for the background section, I think it's pretty weedsy.
Yeah.
Because it really just like gives an overview of what, like, what is public key encryption, what is, like, I think even blockchain is in there.
Yeah.
It would completely dwarf the background section. too.
Yeah, that too. And the
Yeah.
background section, I feel like is more meant to be about the sort of like policy side of the background rather than the technical side of the background.
So I think you kind of need this background to understand the
Mhm.
recommendations, but I think an
Yeah.
appendix makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you need to understand what the certificate authority and the cryptographic hash is.
And we can refer to this appendix.
Yeah.
Right, and I also there's just some general suggestions, like the Secretary of State serve as a notary
Mhm.
for document filing. So the other thing that I did was to show how you could, well, I called it securing the supply, the chain of custody for documents. So you want to include log files that output the hash codes for all your input files. Well, if it's a sensitive application, you should be validating digital signatures on all your input data, because if you're a scanner or
Mhm.
counter, then the results you get are
Yeah.
dependent on valid input data. So it's important that along with your output data, you also
Did you
mark
see the,
which input data was used to create that
yeah.
output data.
Did you see the news article like maybe a few weeks ago about how the Customs and Border Protection still is not validating digital signatures
right,
on
the
passports
passports.
that they started requiring like 12 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, signature verification is important.
So I kind of outlined some suggestions there. I also talked about data formats for signatures, and one thing that I discussed and I'm kind of advocating is the use of jar files, which is it's a zip file, an ordinary zip file you can use with ordinary zip software, including your Windows that considers them archives, but they add an extra directory file that has a manifest with...
I did Java EE years ago, yeah.
Okay, but basically it allows you to put a whole bunch of files in one zip archive. You can have a single signature on all of the data inside, and that validates all of the files.
But we could recommend containerizing it, which is
Well,
much
he's not
more
talking about
modern.
an executable jar file. He's talking about a pure data jar file, right?
I'm just saying a jar file is a standard for
Yeah.
a zip archive with digital signatures in it.
Yeah.
And you can also put multiple digital signatures, so you could have, let's say, the equipment that creates the report, the county election official stating that, I certify this file, and Secretary of State saying it was received and filed.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then it can be, that zip file can be sent around by email or downloaded, and it has all of the data in it necessary to...
Is the NIST working group that you're participating, are they Are they discussing issues like this?
No.
No?
I
Okay.
suggested it and the guy wrote me back, but they're kind of looking at XML only for data interchange.
Okay.
And so,
What I mean for the jar file aspect. No, okay.
they're only looking at XML, and there is a way to attach signatures to XML files.
Also, one question I have is, so your title, the contents of the section seem broader than the title, like, you're talking about secure boot, but that, unless you're considering code as data, like securing is kind of securing the machine itself.
Well, I'm talking about all of these things are, yes,
So you're considering,
code as data. Well, or I mean, the other parts I talk explicitly about data, but then there's a whole section of securing software.
Okay.
yeah, I'm not, most people, I mean, just when you read data, most people, I don't think really brings to mind
Oh,
the installation of the software.
so actually I think there's a heading missing or it got mixed up somehow when I edited this.
Right now, you just have only a 5.3.
I mean,
No, I'm just saying it talks about secure boot. Oh, no, I guess that's the title of the section.
5.3.2.
Yeah.
But we get down to 5 levels of,
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
and if you put it in the appendix, then it won't have that problem. It'll be
Yeah.
A.1,
right.
A.2.
Yeah, exactly. I really like this. I would actually really like to review this in more detail.
So I think maybe what's appropriate at this meeting is kind of just to discuss the
Overall thing, yeah.
parts, and then if you want to read it over and or have some other suggestions, but if you
Mhm.
have any high-level comments or questions.
So, yeah, one reason that I suggest making an appendix 2 is like
I'm not sure if this.
some of these sections I think describe, like a lot of it is like giving background and descriptions of concepts, and some of the concepts are relatively disconnected from each other. Like some of them are connected, like, you know, you get fingerprint, you get public key cryptography, you get symmetric cryptography, but then also like in the middle of it, like between digital notaries and temporary private keys, you have like using a hash of the NASDAQ as a randomness source, for example, which I think is great, but like assorted
Well,
things like that, I think.
you might have
are
some,
impact.
after reading it, you might have some suggestions.
For reordering or-
Because
yeah.
I was shuffling it around
Maybe
myself a
even
little
just-
bit.
Maybe even just a broader title, like could be digital security or something.
For the
Yeah.
appendix?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
So,
I don't remember what I called it.
so I have a few.
Oh, I just
little-
called it securing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just wondering like how expansive would we get with this section, I guess is sort of what we're talking about. But, you know, like, would we ever want to provide like background and recommendations around like chain of custody of like devices, process for loading software on the devices, securing like external ports, or maybe like USB inputs if the device calls for that, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I just was curious, how expensive do you want to get?
I think that things that are certainly very valuable, like, so I think there is some value in like brief explanations of what things like certificate authorities and public key crypto are, but not like, I also think it's okay to say like you should use external resources to learn about these concepts, because there are pretty widespread external resources to learn about those concepts, right? Like if you read the Wikipedia article about certificate authorities and a few other articles, you get a pretty good idea of what it means. But then there's also stuff like the digital notary thing is pretty specific. The digital notary thing, at least in the way that he wants to use, is pretty specific to election stuff. The idea of hashing the NASDAQ thing is not a thing that you're going to find under like a certain term by just Googling a term. And I had another.
Like the digital notary is kind of outside of our scope, but we can't really tell it.
We can't really tell the Secretary of State to do things. But yeah, I'm saying like a lot of techniques that you could use. I think it is worth describing techniques that you could use that are more or less specific to elections or specific to our recommendations, like things like that.
Well, I guess I hadn't written the recommendations yet, so maybe next time I can propose some. But
You're blogging.
I think the recommendations that I would have is that there should be a plan for how data security and cryptography should be used, and that should be part of the requirement specification for producing all the software, so that when it all comes together, it all fits, so that we can guarantee data security and integrity all the way from the input data. So, the data exported from the DFM EMS, would need to be digitally signed as, this is our official export, and then from then on all the way through the whatever statement of votes are filed to the Secretary of State's. There's a chain, of cryptographically verified and signed data. And if you build a voting machine that for like a precinct scanner, it should have secure boot. And then all the data files it read should be digitally signed and verified before it's used. And that concept doesn't really exist now.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that would be good for this community to think through. Like, it's not like, I don't think it's a good thing for us to say like, oh, you should have some security and put in a recommendation like that, and then have the city person we're proposing to be hired or the vendors have to think about how they implement that. Like, I think it does benefit from us giving it a bunch of thought.
Do you think we should be so specific as like saying we recommend that you use jar file? I mean, it seems
Yeah, I mean, I have other beef with the jar file suggestion as well that I won't go into. I think if we make recommendations like that, we should probably make them like soft recommendations.
Yeah.
Or say like, here's
I think we should just say that there should be a plan that decides upon, the method for
doing this, but like
for
the higher level thing of like, here's what I think what you're saying, sorry for interrupting, is like the higher level thing of like, you should, like, A should produce a signed B X, and then like B should consume that and provide a signed Y. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Right, that's what I call chain of custody of secure data.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the thing is that you want to be able to come up with part of the implementation is coming up with a design that can track that, so that you can track, so the software outputs a log that includes the hashes for input data and hashes for output data, and if possible also hashes for the version of software used.
Right.
So if somebody who's really, let's say, religious about open source comes along, then they were going to object to zip files, and they're going to object to Adobe Acrobat because PDF is a proprietary format.
But zip is open source.
7-zip is open source, but WinZip is not.
Sure.
It's called.
You're talking about the application to.
Yeah.
There are also open
It's
source PDF renderers.
It's called InfoZip is the open source.
Yeah.
Right, and
it's
7-zip is another one, but and the same thing when you do signatures in Adobe Acrobat, that's a specific Adobe tweak that makes it a proprietary
that is a proprietary
solution.
extension to the open PDF format.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I agree we should use open format.
I call
whether
that
that's-
I discussed that as an application.
Whether that's
specifically.
important, to us, I think is a separate issue. But somebody who's really adamant about open source.
I think using open format is important. Like I mean, yes, like we can say like, oh, that's just a religious thing, we're not going to engage with that. But like, to use your example of encrypted PDFs, there exists no open source software that can read encrypted PDFs.
Right.
My computer cannot read encrypted PDFs. So like, that's an issue. But like, the basic PDF format is open, the basic zip format is open.
Why would you want to have an encrypted PDF in this case?
You wouldn't, but like assign, if the encryption of PDFs is an Adobe proprietary extension, then I imagine the signing of it might as well be.
I think there's software.
Or is it open?
Well, I know there's software to validate signed
Right.
PDFs that's
Just-
open.
Yeah, that's the thing that I would need to do in this particular case, is validate a signed PDF. So as long as we dodge those kinds of issues, I think we'll be fine. And
But I think part of the requirement is that it
Yeah.
all be open source. So
Well,
whatever cryptography software you have should be based on open. So
yeah.
Absolutely, and it's the same reason I mentioned Linux earlier as opposed to, Windows.
But I think it's also important that like the things produced by this for public consumption can be read. with open source software, but I think that's generally going to be the case if they were produced by open source software to begin with.
But I guess I would advocate, if you produce a PDF report, let's say your statement of votes, then even if that's digitally signed separately, it may be worth inserting a PDF signature, so when you're in Acrobat Reader,
agreed.
it says, this is secure.
But if you run LibreOffice or OpenOffice, you can use the open source software LibreOffice to produce PDF. I mean, that's one of the optional outputs from it.
Right.
So using open source software to produce the proprietary format, I don't know.
It's not a
Actually, I don't
proprietary
know what
format, it's no format.
software exists for signing PDFs.
But yeah, anyway, it's,
Maybe I'm just being simple-minded, but what's wrong with just the naive solution of that's agnostic to the format, just you provide. the
right, just provide a separate
contents.
signature.
What's
Right.
that? Well, I included that in my discussion.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, I think his arguments for a jar are you can have a signature for the entire collection as well for individual files, and you can have multiple signatures from different parties for the same entity.
And it works with existing software like
Yeah.
Jar Signer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
the other comment I wanted to make in response to you, Carl, about the high, like articulating something at a higher level, like another approach even kind of before you get into, spelling out properties, it could just be what are the requirements that we want to have satisfied, and even before you get to.
Do you mean
Oh,
like what do
okay.
we want to have be verified?
So I kind
Yeah,
of discussed
what
some
is
generic
the-
things in the first paragraph there, or the,
First paragraph, which section?
well, there's a bullet list under 5.3.2. But it more or less just
Oh, yes.
says in general what data security can do, so
Mhm.
Yeah,
maybe
but
that
I
can be
mean,
reworked to be improved.
Well, or just maybe there's a more detail of saying like, maybe like Alice should be able to confirm, that this is.
Oh, if you say the word Alice and Bob, then you know you're a crypto nerd.
There's
Well,
an XKCD
I'm
about
just
this.
saying, I'm just saying, what are the properties you want this system to have? That way we can
Yeah.
talk about what implementations
Well,
are.
also I wrote the bullet list before I wrote everything else. So
Yeah.
I probably need to read.
So would this, Chris, include things like a member of the public can verify that a published vote statement was in fact published by the Department of Elections, stuff like that?
I would like to see that,
And the Department of Elections, like the central office can verify that a certain piece of data was generated by that machine at that polling station, those kinds of.
yeah. I mean, that way if we're talking about certain chains of custody, we're knowing
Yeah.
what the purpose of it is.
Yeah, I think what you're touching on is a good opportunity to like define that chain of custody and chain of verifiability in a way that's accessible or at least readable to lay people. Like if you all phrase it that way, as like party A can verify that artifact X was produced by party B at time T, then
Without using variables, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Then with those variables substituted, then you can make a chain of that and lay out that chain in a way that will certainly be understood by people who do elections for their day job.
So how would you describe what the bullet list should be? Or you're saying I should state that,
Well,
how
I
it was used?
I was just saying, if you're gonna be suggesting implementations, I think before that you should also have a section where you're saying what are the properties you want a given system to have, and that way you know what this implementation is in service to.
And like specifically, who's able to verify what?
Yeah, like, is it like election results, or is it like given a machine with installed software, or is it like?
And it's probably it's a mix of all those things, but
Yeah, right.
yeah.
And there might be like 5 of them.
Right. So in data formats, I didn't make any specific recommendations. I just explained what data formats are available
Mhm.
and some aspects of them.
Yeah. Okay, let's.
Oh,
since we've
just
discussed it
also
for
a
while-
comment on hardware devices. I tried to do some research, and it appears that there were a lot more crypto hardware 15, 20 years ago than there is now.
Oh yeah.
Huh.
I don't see much, although I found out that Red Hat and Ubuntu are now FIPS certified
Mm-hmm.
for software cryptography. So you can buy a FIPS certified operating system from either Ubuntu or Red Hat.
or buy
And-
for $0.
And
Well,
also, I think Red Hat, they have something relating to containers as well, like it's a
Yes.
platform for, a secure platform for running
yeah,
containers.
I heard them talk about it yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, I think the crypto devices thing, like, there was a time when people were freaking out about like how expensive crypto was to compute, and then that mindset stuck for a while. And I remember a few years ago when a lot of websites started switching to HTTPS, everyone was like, "Oh, but like, don't you need like twice as many servers?" And some big players like Google were like, "No, we just turned it on," and we were surprised too, but it went fine. Like, in like 20 years that people were still freaking out about it and still thinking that it was 20 years ago. It wasn't 20 years ago anymore, and a lot of that hardware, like the general purpose hardware, caught up enough that you can just now run crypto on it, and it's great.
But actually, it turns out there's a wide variety of crypto chips available now. But it's more made for the Internet of Things marketplace,
Yeah, it's
as
like-
opposed to, USB
Yeah.
dongles or something. So, and in fact, it's fantastic technology that's available
Right, but
really
it's-
cheap now.
But it's aimed at like minimization and power consumption, not performance, right? Like that's the reason why they're building now.
They also have high performance and crypto accelerators as well. But the idea that you have the keys sequestered inside the
Right,
chip,
in the hardware, that's yeah, that's valuable.
And there's other things like a lot of the microcomputer vendors are doing things like secure boot, well, true secure boot.
Yeah, that's also a specific chip that they put in, yeah, TPM.
Let's pause the discussion just for a moment, just to allow the public to comment on this item. So this is agenda item number 9, discussing committee recommendations.
Yeah, I'll take off my California Clean Money Campaign hat and just speak as an individual here on this topic. One of the, without having a detailed knowledge of what you're talking about here, what the documents that you're, because I haven't reviewed them. One of the things I'd suggest is as you look at recommendations for security and cryptography, is to keep in mind the recommendations that are being developed by NIST for BBSG 2.0, and where possible, leverage that and make sure that you're compatible with that. There'll be some recommendations that you might want to do that get into more implementation details that are not part of that, that go a little bit further than that. But even if those recommendations aren't part of the certification standard for initial versions of this open source voting system, it might be worthwhile to keep those in mind as you move down the road.
Do you know the timeline for this relative to where we're at?
My understanding is that there are some specific cybersecurity recommendations that have been put together by the public working group that are reviewed and being considered to be incorporated into the next BVSG.
Is the document complete, or is it just?
Pardon?
So I'm a participant in that.
Okay, so there were some aspirations that there would be elements of a new BVSG approved by the AC this year, but I'm not sure what the,
I meant,
how realistic that is.
I meant, were the guidelines that are drafted around security, were those, are there like known gaps in the document, in what they've prepared so far, or is it a candidate for a?
No, I think it's at the discussion stage now. It's being actively discussed on the cybersecurity email list, and they've also been having some teleconferences. But I think you're correct in that the goal is to have a new set of VVSGs that would include cybersecurity at the end of the year.
Anyone else?
I'm preparing an email right now because there was several years ago a big study about end-to-end verifiable internet voting systems. I wrote a 10-page summary of the 100-page thing, and I'm going to send the link. And even though it's internet voting, I think a lot of what they discuss is going to apply. If you starting to talk about end-to-end, they've done a lot of work on that. So you should be getting that soonish.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, and the verifiability is that's even more, it's from the voter casting the ballot to the result, rather than just the system.
And I think we had a discussion maybe last month and the month before, right, where we had some questions around whether that's even unifiable with like certain privacy requirements.
Right.
So that's like a big to-do area
Yeah.
of the key decisions. And I don't, in my notes we said something about research, but I don't remember what that was exactly.
So, let me offer one thing. This is actually all credit to you for going down and doing all this detail. But one of the things that, as I think about it, when we make recommendations, we should probably call out the what versus the how. And so there's in here a certain amount of how. And so.
So actually, most of the how was more just an illustration of what the concepts are, not necessarily a recommendation.
Yeah, I think it might be good to make a pass over this to, make that separation so that we're not overly constraining whoever it is who has to do the implementation.
So yeah, the goal here of what I wrote is just a matter of definition.
Oh yeah, no,
I'm
I mean
not-
it's great. It's great stuff. And it's just when we put it in the context though of recommendations coming out of our committee, then there's a gray area between saying, okay, you got to use JARS or you got to use Docker, or,
Right.
versus
So I think this makes sense as an appendix, but then we need to put something in the other sections that are more specific about,
Like what's
well, at least what we recommend the capabilities be, and maybe also recommend these items have to be created as a sub-project to make certain definitions.
And it may be that the team doing the implementation, we could recommend that they have a formal security audit done, because there are people who do that for a living, and that. So, just a thought.
Yeah, and a sort of outlandish thing that I'll add there is the past summer, so like 9-ish months ago, there's an annual security conference in Las Vegas you all might be familiar with called DEF CON, where people had, they had a focus on voting that year, unsurprisingly. And people had brought in a bunch of voting machines that they had like found in all sorts of dark, dusty corners of closets and whatnot. And those voting machines were difficult to acquire, had to be dragged into there, and the vendors of those voting machines were not happy that they were there, and were not willing to were for the most part not willing to provide, because they'd also reached out to the vendors and said if you want to look good, donate us a thing, and then we will tell you all the ways in which our people managed to compromise it, because and of course these things were compromised in all sorts of ways. So I suppose if you have an open source system, it's much easier for people like that and researchers to reconstitute the system. But a more outlandish suggestion, riffing off what he's saying, is do that, ship them a machine, and say break this, which is the anarchist version of a security audit.
Yeah, RSA's conference is here this year, isn't it?
It's been here for a couple years in a
Yeah,
row.
yeah,
It's
I
in
think
February.
Huh?
It's in February usually, isn't it?
Yeah, it's later.
Oh, did they change it?
I think.
I went to the RSA conference 25 years, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
There might even be some states that have laws about disposing of machines, or maybe it's contracts where you're not allowed to, you have to give it back to the manufacturers.
Right.
They're gonna have DEF CON next summer, it's kind of do a follow-up.
I'm sure.
So by the way, did you see it?
And the voting system vendors are trying to reduce the supply.
April 16th.
On the eBay, because they don't want people to get a hold of them.
Oh, that's right. They got them off eBay. Yeah.
So they're buying
So RSA conference is 16 to 20 April here.
Huh, okay, later than I thought.
So on the topic of recommendations, we spent quite a bit of time a few meetings ago talking about secure boot, and I thought we'd come very close to even, coming up with something on that topic. And
In terms of a requirement?
yeah, I mean, just a couple sentences, like, I think we had said that, does anyone remember what we were, just in terms of like, describing the scenario where
Yeah.
you want to be able to verify that if you download something and then install it, that you're.
Oh, okay, that's actually, so yeah,
more
depending on
well-defined.
what aspect you're talking about, that's either secure boot or reproducible builds.
Well, I think it was both. We were.
Yeah, there's also a middle ground between those that I'm not sure has a term. That's the notion of that when you install software. So secure boot specifically looks at the bits of software that are hard to verify, like basically the operating systems components and sort of down from there.
Oh.
And its purpose really is to build up like a guarantee of security, a chain of verification that starts at the bottom. And those bottom levels are hard, and that's why secure boot is a thing that has its own term in its own area. But what I was talking about more specifically is like just the notion of when you ship software deploy software to a machine, that software was signed by somebody.
Yes, that we did.
And you could even, I know that we have no direct influence on state level things, but a thing that would be cool is if the Secretary of State's office certifies a certain piece of software, you could have a digital signature attesting to that
So
fact.
could we host our own version?
Yeah, you can host your own CA for that, but then it just said, then what it means is like, the San Francisco Department of Elections has verifiably said this is the correct software to deploy to this machine.
Yeah.
You still don't solve the problem of like verifying the machine that actually runs that software, which is a super hard problem. But at least when the machine is like accepting a software update, and the machine is not itself like super compromised or acting in bad faith, a good faith machine and a good faith person updating the machine can verify the software update that they're being given was in fact the one signed by Director Arns or whoever, and not like,
Well,
someone you didn't like drop your USB key on the floor on Bart and like someone switched it with something else.
I mean, if that's easy to do,
I actually just discussed that in the I went into a lot more detail about like what security is, securing the operating system, and also talking about that maybe the keys need to be from a recognized authority.
Right.
Like
so you're
you're
talking
not.
about reproducible builds too?
I should have put that in there.
I don't think there's anything in there about reproducible builds, but that's a.
There was a reference to Intel Pentium in there, which I found odd.
Well, I indirectly had a reference to reproducible builds, but I should put that in there. But legally, the government is required to only use certified software.
Mhm.
That includes everything.
Yeah.
So it should be easy to convince the Secretary of State
Right.
to
Digitally sign.
give us a digital signature, especially if we say, here's the jar signer or whatever, run this command, or whatever format it is.
Right, but
So-
even if you don't do that, you could get the Department of
Do they
Elections
need
to
to
do
have a certain infrastructure to be able to securely host?
They need to have a CA infrastructure, but they might already have that. A lot of governments do.
They actually
Um,
might even have.
The state might already have it. I don't know which states in the U.S. have it. I do know for a fact that every country that issues passports that are accepted for travel to the United States have CA infrastructure to digitally sign those passports.
So is this tied to the issue of driver's licenses? That some of the states now are being told by the federal government that
Oh, the Real ID Act?
Yeah.
I don't know if Real ID includes cryptographic signatures.
But so the thing is that you may want a different root
Yeah,
certificate
sure.
authority anyway, because you want to say this machine can only boot software that's been verified by this,
Yeah, and
authority.
And maybe there's like a root CA for California, and then there's a sub CA for the Secretary of State's office or whatever. But it's very plausible that there's already some CA infrastructure of some description.
But
in the
that would
state
be a
government somewhere.
general certificate authority, so.
Yeah, but they
But
can.
you can still.
But they can sign a sub CA, right? They can delegate. You have
Yeah.
CAs can delegate to other CAs.
Well, I'm just saying your secure boot might require not the general
Yeah.
security, but then.
But as long as it's a
actually-
child
yeah,
of.
But that's actually something to investigate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something to investigate. What people use chains of certificates and chains of authorities for this all the time. So like the CA that signs your passport is not actually like the CA of your government. It is a CA that itself has a certificate that is signed by the CA of your government saying like, I delegate this responsibility to this CA. So like chains and trees of delegation like that happen.
Do those chains depend on every link being secure or just the most nearest link?
It basically just when you say depend on being secure, what do you mean? Like,
Which do you have to trust for the?
you only have to trust the root of the chain is the idea.
Oh, only the-
So the idea is that if the so for example the U.S. government say, well I'll use the Dutch government as an example because I know for a fact that they have this infrastructure and I know that they have unusual infrastructure for a nation state. They have a root CA that is like the state of the Netherlands CA, and it delegates to certain sub CAs. So it has signed certain certificates that say like the CA with this public key is authorized to act on my behalf for this purpose, and it has a sub CA for like signing, website stuff for SSL, and it has a different sub CA for like signing passports.
If the sub CA is compromised, then it doesn't affect the ultimate.
Exactly. Of course, if the root is compromised, then you're screwed. But that's how all top-down tree systems work.
So the payment card industry has a whole complex regulations with
Right.
basically also not only
Yeah.
the hardware and also very tough physical security. Like you have to go special data centers with multiple fingerprints.
Yeah,
and-
because the other trick with this is that what I described is also a simplification. If you're really paranoid, then what you do is your root CA is going to get involved and you take it out every 3 years or so, and then you use that to sign a temporary one with a lifetime of 3 years that you use to sign everything else. And then after some period of time, you cycle that and you go into your vault and sign the next one.
I didn't go into that level of detail.
Yeah, no, but it's like there's a lot of
Because,
Stuff that you can submit on
down the road, we may all move to
But I
blockchain
mean,
anyway.
the thing is that we start with self-signed certificates.
Yeah, just at the city.
But the point is to establish the use of signatures.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, okay, so, yeah, I mean, it would be great to have these concise recommendations in addition to the length of your appendix. Okay, so we've discussed that for quite a bit. Are there any other topics people wanted to raise for agenda item number 9 before we move on to the next item?
Let me remind myself. It is agenda item
It's
9
sort of like
is. Oh, it's like the catch-all item for
official
recommendations.
that don't fall in other categories. Yeah, I mean, nothing's been prepared.
I have a small thing, but I'll keep that to 10.
Okay, then let's move on to the next item.
Item 10, topics for future discussion. Discussion and possible action regarding topics for future discussion.
Okay, we've mentioned a few things earlier in the meeting, some to-dos. And I actually realized there was something I forgot to raise earlier. It was under the accessible changes I made. There was one question I had, and that was under one of your options. How do we provide accessible options? One of them was providing it at select precincts and then transporting people. And my question was, is that legal in California?
I don't know the answer.
Okay, well, maybe we can revisit that.
What's the question?
What is legal?
Whether it's legal
Well,
to have.
do you have to have accessible voting equipment in every precinct? Or can you have vote centers and then just have transportation provided?
Well, no, you had suggested having select precincts, but as long as you provide transportation.
Right.
So
I think every voting place has to have.
I think so.
that's kind of what I thought.
I
So
think it's not.
So maybe we should delete that.
in a future meeting, we can do that. But for now, I put a question next to it, so we can revisit that. All right, anything else?
I will briefly mention that I discovered an old to-do item for me to write something about shims for libraries.
I'm looking forward to
Which,
that one.
yep, sorry to disappoint for so long. I am working hard to dig myself out of other volunteer commitment backlogs. And of course, I have more time-sensitive things going on with, like, you're gonna send me a template for writing the report. And,
But don't let that stop you from. doing
yeah,
things.
no. I mean, but that has a deadline, right? That needs to be ready to be reviewed and hopefully approved at April 12th meeting. And
Actually-
the people at the conference want to see my talk. So I need to
Actually, we
make.
can even approve the text even if the template, if it's not a part of the template, so.
Oh yeah, it's true. But I do need to write something by April 12th, and I also need to give my talk the weekend of March 24th. And the people at the conference want to illegally already have it. It sounds like in the morning email I got this morning. So I need to work on that first. But I will work on the shoe stuff next, after those things.
Okay. Anyone else?
And I had a question to sort of both you generally and Mr. Carey. Mr. Carey in his public comment brought something up about encouraging this lobbying with the state to get matching funds specifically for open source development. Are there actions that we can take on that?
Well, so I'm in touch with those people.
Okay, cool.
Just, but I think the action we took today is.
The letter
I think
that we
it's-
sent, yeah.
Is going to help. As a committee, it's more of a policy thing that I think the city kind of has a rule that committees can't really take positions on legislation unless going through this official channel. So.
And I think even the commission's ability to take positions in legislation is limited, right?
Yeah, but I think as members of the public, you're free to
Right.
write to whomever you want.
And it sounds like you're already doing some things.
As an individual, yeah.
Okay.
Individually. So, okay. Anything else? Another question?
No, that was it.
Okay, let's do public comment. This item. Okay. No. Any other comments before we? Okay, then I guess that's the last item. So it's 8:12 p.m. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.